Hi guys, so I'm just about to head across town to Gikondo to my friend Joe's place. Tonight is the 5th of November. Now I know for most of the world you've finished with Halloween, you're now getting ready to prep for Christmas. But for Brits we have got one other little celebration in between those two, which is Bonfire Night. Now I know that I said in my video about the Queen's Jubilee that as Brits in Rwanda there isn't really an expat community, we don't all kind of hang out together and do things, with perhaps the exception of carol singing at Christmas. But this is actually one exception. Is a few years ago my friend Jo opened up her garden to friends and Brits who wanted to come with their children to celebrate this very, very traditionally British celebration of Bonfire Night. And it's quite interesting because I don't know if you can see behind me, but it's raining a little bit at the moment. It's very, very overcast and grey, and it's just an unpleasant day, and I've got a slight cold. I did actually check, it's not COVID, it is just a cold. But to me, it does actually feel very British at the moment. It feels like November. If it wasn't 25 degrees, it would be Britain in November. So it's the right weather for this. So I thought just before we go over there that I give a very sort of concise rundown of what Bonfire Night is and kind of the history of it and why we celebrate it. Because sort of objectively, standing around a fire, screaming burn him," as we throw somebody onto it, kind of requires a little bit of explanation. So here we go.
The Gunpowder Plot happened in England in 1605, but to understand the events leading up to it, we need to go back about another 70 years. As with many great tragedies, this one began when a very horny man noticed a rather pretty woman. This was further complicated by the fact the man was already married, and he also happened to be the King of England. Henry VIII is famous for having had 6 wives, but it's with the first 2 that the problem began. Henry's first wife was Catherine of Aragon, a Spanish princess. The marriage of Henry and Catherine helped cement relations between England and Spain, and both countries were staunchly Catholic at the time. These countries bowed to the Pope of Rome as head of the Catholic Church. The marriage started out well, but as the years rolled by and Catherine did not produce a male heir, Henry's eye began to wander. They eventually came to rest on Anne Boleyn, the sister of his wife's lady-in-waiting. Henry was so smitten that he wanted to ditch Catherine and marry Anne. But there was a problem. Under the Catholic Church, there was no such thing as divorce. Absolutely not. No way. It truly was till death us do part. Henry did try to petition the Pope to see if there was any way to get him off the hook, but the Pope said no. So Henry did what any of us would have done under the same circumstances. He founded his own religion. It was called the Church of England, and, as head of that church, Henry could set his own rules. He promptly divorced Catherine and sent her off into exile, declaring Anne his new wife. He actually went on to behead Anne, so it didn't really work out great for either of them, but that's another story. Henry eventually died without a male heir, and so began a game of musical thrones. His eldest daughter, by Catherine, became Queen Mary I. She was kind of hacked off at her dad for the way he treated her mother, and decided to restore Catholicism to England. She rounded up as many Protestants as she could and had them burnt at the stake, earning her the epithet Bloody Mary. Mary only lasted 5 years before she died, at which point her half-sister, Henry's daughter by his second wife Anne Boleyn, took the throne as Queen Elizabeth I. Like her father, Elizabeth was Protestant. At first, she didn't appear too bothered about controlling her subjects' personal beliefs, but that soon changed. At that time, England and Scotland were not yet united, and her Catholic cousin, Mary Queen of Scots, had a lot of support in England. In order to eliminate this threat and secure her crown, Elizabeth was persuaded to murder her cousin. This ended the Catholic threat in England, and Elizabeth affirmed this by passing a law that no Catholic could ever sit on the throne of England again. And indeed, none ever has. The same was true for prime ministers until as recently as 2013, when the law was amended. But arguably, there still has not yet been a Catholic PM. Tony Blair converted to Catholicism after he left office, so as not to cause a fuss, and Boris Johnson, although baptised a Catholic, later converted to the Church of England. Anyway, on with the story. Queen Elizabeth I was known as the Virgin Queen because she never married and had no children. On her death, her cousin's son, James VI of Scotland, became James I of England, uniting the two countries. At first, everyone gave a deep sigh of relief, thinking the religious strife would come to an end. But although James was slightly more tolerant of Catholics than his predecessors, he continued to impose the religious persecution. If you wanted to be excused from attending Anglican services, you had to pay a hefty annual fine. And if you were caught practising Catholicism too openly, there was still the possibility of execution. It was safest to at least pretend to be Church of England in public. It was in this atmosphere of heavy religious persecution that the Gunpowder Plot was conceived of by a staunch Catholic called Robert Catesby. Hatched with the support of noble Catholic families in Northamptonshire, the Gunpowder Plot was a simple one. Get rid of James I and replace him with his 9-year-old daughter Elizabeth as head of a Catholic state. To assist with this, Catesby recruited a gentleman by the name of Guido Fawkes. Guido was actually an Englishman from Yorkshire. On the death of his father, he had sold up his estate, taken the money and headed to Spain to fight for the Catholic Spanish in their 8-year war against the Dutch. He rose to the rank of general in the Spanish army, where he learned a bit about blowing things up. Catesby's plan was a simple one. Stuff the basement of the Houses of Parliament with gunpowder, wait until the king entered Parliament, then blow him up. Everything started out well. They rented a room next to Parliament, managed to fill the basement with 36 barrels of gunpowder, and were just waiting for the king to return from a hunting weekend. But then things went a little bit wrong. To this day, nobody knows who it was, but one of the members of the group had a pang of conscience. They suddenly realised that if they blew up the king whilst he sat in Parliament, they would also be blowing up a number of Catholic nobles who were sympathetic to their cause. So one of the group sent an anonymous letter to Lord Monteagle, one such lord from a traditionally Catholic family. The note was not completely explicit. It didn't say, "We're going to blow up the Houses of Parliament, best if you stay home from work that day." But it wasn't that subtle either. It stated that Parliament would receive a terrible blow. Little did the conspirators know at the time that Lord Monteagle's loyalty to the king would trump his loyalty to the cause. And the letter soon made its way into the monarch's possession. The words, "a terrible blow," made the king suspicious, and he ordered Parliament to be swept, uncovering the barrels of gunpowder in the basement, along with a man in scarf and hat, with a lantern and a box of matches. On his arrest, the man gave his name as John Johnson, but his true identity was soon revealed as Guy Fawkes. Catesby, realising that they'd been sprung, hightailed it up country. Even though the plot to blow up Parliament had failed, he still believed they could incite a Catholic uprising in the Midlands. They escaped with a couple of bags of gunpowder, which got a bit damp on the way. When they reached the safety of Holbeck House in Staffordshire, they lit a fire and laid the gunpowder out around it to dry. Now, it's a little-known fact, but gunpowder is extremely flammable. A spark from the fire went up, and it came down, igniting the gunpowder and engulfing Catesby in flames. Badly burnt, but still alive, his luck was about to get even worse, when the next day the Sheriff of Worcester and his men surrounded the building and managed to shoot Catesby dead. The rest of the men were rounded up and taken to London to stand trial. Now, in 1605, England was still executing people for witchcraft, usually single women who didn't fit into society's expectation of a good wife. It's a common misconception that witches were burnt in England. Usually they were hanged, but we did burn heretics. A heretic was a blasphemer, someone who denounced God, or the right God, being that of the Church of England. However, there was one crime above that of heresy. One crime so heinous that it warranted the worst possible method of execution. That was the crime of treason, to betray the king. If you were a woman who committed treason, you were likely to be hanged or burnt. But for a man, it got a lot worse. The method of execution was to be hung, drawn and quartered. This meant that on the day of execution, you would be taken from your prison cell, tied to the back of a horse, and dragged through the street to your place of execution. You would arrive scraped and blooded, possibly with a broken bone or two. From there, you would be hoisted up by the neck until you were half dead. This meant being hanged until you passed out, at which point you would be cut down and revived so that you were fully conscious when they drew a line from your privates to your neck and removed parts of you that should not be removed. When you were finally dead, they would tie each limb to a horse and split you into 4 parts, sending each quarter to a different part of the realm to warn people what would happen to those who commit treason. Effective advertising, and very Game of Thrones. Guy Fawkes was to be executed on a platform facing the Houses of Parliament, a building that, had things gone to plan, shouldn't still be there. Fawkes waited until they placed the rope about his shoulders, then jumped from the platform, breaking his own neck and sparing himself the torture that was to follow. In the aftermath, King James passed the Act of Thanksgiving, thanking God that the king was still alive and making it law that the 5th of November, the day of the failed assassination attempt, be celebrated throughout the kingdom. In essence, it is England's own Thanksgiving Day. People celebrated by lighting fires and setting off small explosives, and originally by throwing an effigy of the Pope of Rome onto the fire, which was soon replaced by an effigy of Guy Fawkes. This law remained in place until 1859, but Brits have continued to celebrate Bonfire Night ever since, often with elaborate firework displays. Whereas the origins of the celebration are clear, it's uncertain why we continue to shout with such gusto for the burning of the Catholics to this day. According to statistics, the UK today is technically an atheist country, with more people holding no religion than holding a religion. And those who do hold a religion can hold any religion they like. The only explanation is that we Brits enjoy a good tradition, especially when it involves mulled wine and toffee apples. And as for Guy Fawkes, he is often referred to as the only person in history to enter the Houses of Parliament with honest intentions. Welcome to Bonfire Night at Joe's Place. Here's the guy. This is a traditional game of apple bobbing. You have to try to pick up an apple with your mouth, no hands. Sometimes you also get sweets in a bowl of flour, and the same rules apply.
Are you familiar with this?
Push it up against the side.
Stare at the fire.
A couple of very confused Americans wondering what they're supposed to do.
You stay here next to me. Whoa!
Another successful bonfire night, dear.
Stay back.
think I heard a shout of revolution as she disappeared out the door. Right. I shall catch up with you later in the... No, it's been lovely. Yes.
That was fun being British again for a minute. I'm home now. I wimped out early because of my cold. And I'm home with a hot toddy, which is perfect for this kind of evening. Joe was making mulled wine, but I opted out of alcohol, and then I got home and I thought, hot toddy would be good. So basically, what have I got? Ow, 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 it's very hot. So my hot toddy, I make that with a little splash of Old Monk, I think that's Indian rum, Old Monk rum. And then you include, I've put honey, or you can use sugar, a dash of lemon, I don't have any lemon, and then a pinch of cinnamon. I think I put a tiny tinge of, I put a tinge of ginger and a pinch of cinnamon in here, and then you put the cool water in first so you don't shock the glass, and then you top it up with hot water, boiling water, and you've got a nice warm, radiating, glowing drink. Just to ease the throat, and I'm just going to sit and enjoy that. It's grog, basically. I think that's the same as the recipe for grog, but hot toddy. And I'm going to go and sit down and see if my mum's taken any photos this year, because they've probably been down the field in the village that I'm from, and where we have a huge bonfire. We have a 30-foot bonfire there some years. In fact, because it's the end of the video, I'm gonna put up some video clips that I have from previous years at the field where I usually go back home to celebrate bonfire with my family, because it's such a big event in the UK. It's a fireworks night. Now, we can't have fireworks here, but in the UK they're letting off fireworks all night, and big bonfires. So I shall show you what that looks like.